your best life. Please welcome Rosalyn Kahn.
Our objective tonight is to transform some of the horror and terror that we experience when we're witnessing a film like this and really being reminded of the terrible trauma that we experience into a sense of power, a sense of hope, and a real sense of possibility. We're so blessed to have some of our most extraordinary leaders join us for this incredible conversation. So I want to start by inviting Mayor Karen Bass, Mayor of the City of Los Angeles, to please come join me on stage. Thank you so much. Mayor Bass, who has been an incredible friend to our Jewish community throughout the course of her work, and who every day is working to build a more just and loving society in our country and right here in the city. And we're just so blessed to have you working and directing your efforts on the local front now. So we thank you so much. We have our newest congressperson, Sydney Kamlager-Dove, who was recently elected representative from the 37th district in Los Angeles. And it is with great joy that we welcome you here as well, and that we get to send you to DC. Thank you. And of course, our dear friend, Congressmember Adam Schiff, who is in his 12th term serving the 30th Congressional District in Los Angeles. He is a leading member of the House Judiciary Committee. He is currently on leave from the House Appropriations Committee. He is a strong and powerful voice for what is just and good in this city and in the country, and we're so grateful. In a few moments, we're going to invite up our two other panelists, Aziza, Hasan, and Patrice O'Neill, to talk more about this film. But first, we wanted to have a moment just with the three of you. I mean, we live in a city that is truly one of the most diverse cities in the entire world. And we have an extraordinary multi-faith and multiracial network that works here that has built, I think, a very great sense of hope and possibility for many of us. At the same time, I know that there's so much more that needs to be done. And while I've seen the three of you and many of your colleagues here show up again and again and again in all the moments where it matters most, I don't want for us to have to show up in these moments anymore. And the reason that we have to keep coming out to speak out in this way is because the violence persists and the hatred persists. And to be honest, not enough people are stepping forward when it matters. So I want to just invite you to offer for one moment what resonates for you from this story about Tree of Life, and how you envision that we might be able to build a better and stronger city.
Rabbi, thank you for inviting us, and to Sam and Nick and Carl, thank you for helping to organize this get-together as well. Wonderful to see my colleagues, our wonderful mayor and Sydney. I think, like everyone, I had a variety of emotions watching this film. I expected to be traumatized by reliving what happened in Pittsburgh, and it certainly was traumatizing. I didn't expect to be so uplifted. And the images of communities coming together, seeing Jews and Muslims embrace and come to each other's aid, to see Christians and Jews come together, black and white come together, Asians experiencing the same, both experience of being the subjects of hate, but also joining together in love for a fellow community, was just so uplifting. And it really brought to mind for me what Martin Luther King said when he said that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. And hate cannot drive out hate, only love can. Because you could see in the love for these communities, for each other in the wake of this tragedy, that hate was being driven out. And what I kept thinking was, how do we not wait for tragedy to bring us together? How do we not have to wait for another terrible tragedy in our community or in another community before we come together in love?
You know, for me, the movie was the film, and a shout out to filmmakers and artists, because I think they're actually part of the solution, a critical part of the solution, helping us to heal and see things. You know, I went to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon, so I went to school in Pittsburgh, and watching this film was actually encouraging for me, because it was in Pittsburgh that I had such a hard time finding an apartment to rent, because I had a number of landlords that didn't want to rent to a black student. And it was in Pittsburgh where my girlfriend, who is lighter than me, was waiting across the street, and a man rolled down the window at the stop sign and yelled at her, "Nigger, go home." So I have a different sense about Pittsburgh. So to actually see this film, and I had friends that lived in Squirrel Hill and I lived in Shadyside, to see this film and a change of perspective was important for me, because it was a city that was incredibly segregated and was not dealing with some of its own truths. You know, a steel town, very blue collar, resentment with different schools being there, and all kinds of folks from across the world going to school there, and tensions around poverty and unemployment. And I think we see that thread in so many other cities, both big and small, where communities are grappling with their existence and what coexistence means. And oftentimes we think coexistence has to be binary. I'm here and you're not. How do we share the small amount of crumbs that seem to be available for all of us? And in that is where fear is bred, and I think is where violence and intimidation and bullying and propaganda and rhetoric kind of thrive. I was reminded about a quote from another king, Coretta Scott King, that said, you know, freedom is part of this struggle that we have to fight and win with every generation. And so what was hopeful for me in the film were young people stepping into uncomfortable spaces and wanting to commit to learn about each other, and to own biases and maybe judgment, and things that they don't know, in order to find understanding. And how can we replicate that across all spaces? I was also struck by the fact that in this moment in time, we are fighting for democracy, and we are fighting for freedom, and we are fighting for life in this moment. You know, before it was the freedom to vote, and then it was the freedom to love, and now it's the freedom to be. I'm hopeful because, to Adam's point, there is a community in healing and in truth. But we have to support and embrace and empower each other in those spaces so that we can build that kind of power.
Well, I didn't have the opportunity to see the film because I just arrived. But, but let me just say, though, that, I so remember the massacre that happened. And actually, prior to last year's, I spent a great deal of time in Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh has gotten a lot better. So I don't think I would be surprised by the solidarity that you talked about in the film. But we really are at an incredible crossroads. And Adam, I was thinking about January 6th when you were talking and wondering whether or not it triggered it for you. Because Adam and I were both there on January 6th, but what he hasn't said is that we all know that he was one of the main leaders on impeachment. And he had to deal with threats from people like the guy that did that massacre all the time, and I imagine you still do, because he had to travel with security. So those threats are still out there. And when I think about what happened at the Tree of Life, I also remember, there were hate crimes that happened around then. You remember right before it was the guy, and Trump instigated this because he said that the guy that conducted the massacre, and I'm not sure if this was in the film, but he said that, part of his reason was because of the conspiracy that Jewish folks were bringing people across the border. That was during the time when Trump said we needed to have the army on the border because we were being invaded. And a few weeks before the massacre, there was a guy that was leaving these fake bombs around everybody, and they eventually caught him. Was that covered in the film? And when they caught him, his van was filled with all kinds of Trump paraphernalia. I mean, that was the Trump forces that we're still dealing with, and the thought that some of those people, I think some of the ones from January 6th, didn't some of them win their election? Are they in Congress? Yeah, what? How did we get here with this? So this threat is very, very real. And you said, we won, freedom to vote, freedom to love, but they're trying to take both of that. I mean, especially the freedom to vote and building in the changes so that they could change the structure of election.
Thank you so much for this question. And in context of that question, I want to introduce Zach Banner, former Pittsburgh Steeler, who is here with us tonight. He lives in Los Angeles. Zach, will you please stand up? I think he's so much a part of the story. Where are you? Standing, Zach. Thank you. I think we follow stories. As all of this was taking place, we were seeing the rise in anti-Semitism, as I said earlier. And as my friend Eric Ward says, anti-Semitism is the ideological driver in the white power movement. And I think Zach sort of alluded to that. It's like if we understand that, we begin to unpack some of what you just spoke about. What can we do about it? That has been my life's work. Right? What can we do? And to see what unfolded in Pittsburgh, to see what was apparent on the ground when Sharon first went there, was to know that this is a story that can possibly move people into action in a new way. Pittsburgh created that. We decided to look for the light, and there was so much light. There is so much light in Pittsburgh. The racism that you spoke about, that hasn't gone away. Obviously it hasn't, and it's part of the longer film where, there are more conversations about that and the challenges that remain. But there is an opening, and in this trauma that took place, I think the Jewish community played such a significant role. First of all, and let me just say this, they were prepared. They were prepared for this attack because of the relationships that they had built over time. It wasn't just suddenly, Wasi Muhammad appears. He had Rabbi Meyer's phone number. They knew each other. These relationships were there, and these connections were there. And we have seen that over and over again in Not in Our Town stories over these decades. That is what we can do to begin to prevent hate. Build those connections earlier. And so it is part of, I guess, what I've seen for so many years. When we do that, we strengthen ourselves. That is one of the core ingredients of hate crime prevention and intolerance.
The fear is there, and I keep going back to my personal experiences. At times I feel like I can do this, I step forward, and at other times I feel so stuck. And I think of Pittsburgh and that moment when New Ground doesn't really statements, we do relationships. And at that moment, people were saying, you need to show, we want you to show up. And I knew we had to show up in the biggest possible way. And as I looked out across this, there was this huge gathering of people at the federal building, right following the attack. It was here in Los Angeles. And I remember seeing a sea of faces of so many different people, and all of our people were there. And in that moment, we knew that we had to move past the fear. There was something that was calling on us to move forward. And especially, so I'm looking at the sea of faces, and I see Andrea, and I see Omar Hakim, and I see this Make America Great Again, huge massive poster and a person there. And then there's another guy not too far, and he's wearing a Punch a Nazi t-shirt, and it's clear that there's gonna be something. And so Omar looks at one guy, and Andrea looks at the other, and they both literally turn their backs to each other because they know each other, and they start to de-escalate the other people. And nothing happened, and that was the point, because people were willing to step forward because they trusted each other so deeply. And sometimes the fear is there, and other times we know that we just have to trust each other and lean on each other. You are there for me, and I am there for you, and that when we are truly there for each other, that's what truly makes us safe.
You know, the first time Julius ever performed for us, I believe, was it on our roof deck? Was that right? Was it about eight years ago? Yeah, 8 years ago, Julius has been with us. Long journey we've had together, and he's performed, I think, 4 or 5, 6 times. I can't even remember how many times. But Julius is from a very famous family in the UK. They're like the Kennedys in England. He's called the Cowdreys. Well, it's a bit like that. They're very famous cricket families. Does anybody know what cricket is? Oh, yeah! Yeah, cricket? Oh, okay, somebody knows cricket. All right. And his father was captain of the England cricket team, and his grandfather was probably the greatest player that ever played the game of cricket. Colin Cowdrey, Sir Colin Cowdrey. So he was very famous.
So now you think, why is he a singer?
His brother was a cricket player, so... but also, we wanted to ask Julius a couple of questions. So Julius, why haven't you played your #1 song?
Oh, the #1 song. Okay, a little story about this. My first song I released was a song called 7 Roads, which I may seem to you if you want to hear it. And I went to #1 on the singer-songwriter iTunes chart. So I didn't go into the world chart, but thank you, Alex. It's quite funny, after that happened, I had about 5 gigs, and every gig someone would, because I posted a picture being like, look, I'm on the top of this chart. Every single gig for the next 4 or 5 gigs, I'd be introduced, welcome Julius Cowdrey to the stage, beating Ed Sheeran to #1. Now, I did that day beat Ed Sheeran to #1, but the song that he was at #3, he'd released 3 years prior, and I was only on #1 spot for 24 hours. But as we had a few other, Tom Adele was #2, Gabrielle Aplin was #4, and I screenshotted before it left the stage. So technically #1 for a day. Thank you all. Now, wondering what to do. Everyone thinks that I'm a fool, 'cause I've been searching just for you. You told me once, you told me twice that you won't be there for me. I still wander down these 7 roads, hoping that I'll see you. I'll see you, oh, and I'll see you, I'll see you, oh, and I'll see you, I see you, no, no. used to be. You told me once, you told me twice, you won't be there for me. I still wander down these 7 roads, hoping that I'll see you all. When I see you, I'll see you. Oh, when I see you, I'll see you. No, no. When I see you, I'll see you. No, no. When I see you, no. When I see you, no. When I see you, I'll see you. Thanks very much.
Hi, this is Rosalyn Kahn from Sharon Entertainment, Living Your Best Life, and I'm here with the wonderful Julius. I got that name right, correct?
You got it right.
Oh, good. So, Julius, what was it like performing here in the United States? I know you've done this a number of times, but how is this one compared to all the other ones you've done?
This one feels more raw. It's been a long time since I've performed with COVID and lockdown, and to be back here, a bit more mature, a bit more grown up, with new music, it felt very special.
Fantastic. Now, is it always about a breakup? Have you ever done one that's about a non-breakup?
There was one in there, but I know it was so covered with so many breakup songs. When you are heartbroken, when you go through something, it's so easy to write, right? It's so raw and so easy for the words to flow. So, Adele did pretty well off it, didn't she? So
She did really well. I think this song that I really liked was the one that you told us to put down our phones and just listen, because so many people in our world are so hooked into their phones and everything else in the world. Now, if there's one thing that most people didn't know about you, besides your fame and your fortune and those other things, what would be the one thing that most people probably don't know about you that you haven't said yet?
I have a twin brother.
You have a twin brother.
And I'm half Swedish.
Oh my God, I love Sweden. You know it in Danish?
No.
Okay, I'll tell you what I know in Danish is jag elsker dig.
Yeah, Elskade is it's Swedish as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what that means?
Elskade, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, so where can people follow you if they want to, find out about you and do stuff?
So you can find me on Spotify, Instagram, the whole lot, Julius Cowdrey. Julius like Caesar, Cowdrey like the animal with the DRE on the end.
Well, that sounds fantastic. My name is Rosalyn Kahn. I'm a TEDx speaker and author, humanitarian ambassador of peace, just a few other things. So it's truly been an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and gratitude beyond words. You are so kind.
Thanks for having me.